Hello and welcome to the COO's Corner Podcast, episode 11, the podcast exploring success factors in the world of business operations. And my name is Tamar Nelson, your host and a specialist in the area of operational resilience. And today's topic is one worth exploring: why conscious leadership is the new way. The term conscious leadership has been getting more and more traction, particularly since the pandemic. This is an area that can lead us to better successes and lasting transformations with accelerated results. To discuss this topic further with us is Josh Greco. Joshua is a Mindscan certified business coach for individuals and leadership teams. With over a decade of business development experience in logistics and construction industries, Joshua brings a passion to develop people professionally, personally, and spiritually. So he's definitely the man to talk to on this topic. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. So excited to have you here with us.
Tamar, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have a very engaging and in-depth conversation. Looking forward to it.
We are as well. So on this podcast, Josh, this is a space where we speak about all things business, operations, and growth. And to start us off, what is conscious leadership and why is it crucial for business success?
I think conscious leadership is paying attention to the things that matter in such a way that they can be addressed. I think feedback is such a gift for not only our professional environments, but our personal environments as well. But if we don't have a mechanism built in to be able to address those things, then problems can just kind of run amok and problems can stack on top of those original problems. So conscious to me speaks to, you have to notice something. Like, to become conscious of something is to become aware of it. And the only way that consciousness can grow is if you pay attention to it, if you give more awareness to it. And I think that's key with, anytime we're always trying to achieve the optimum of something in our business. Mm-hmm. Whenever something trips us up or prevents us from optimizing, that's a clue right there. It's information for us to address something so that doesn't happen again.
Right. So these are things that we want to pay attention to and not disregard. And I know in businesses, sometimes we tend to see the thing and say, okay, I'll fix it later. But from what I'm hearing from you, building consciousness is saying, hey, this is something that matters. Let's go and address it. So it's expanding that awareness. And the way how I see it, Josh, as leaders, we have to create this climate for organizational success and growth. And I think that, by leaders consistently applying an approach that builds consciousness that will lead to transformations of not only that our own purview, but also that of the organization, because I think we'll be building relationships, we'll be building culture that will help that transformation. Do you agree with this?
I do. I think it comes down to, we're in an age right now to where it's becoming more normal to not accept the normal, if that makes sense. Gone are the ages of just clocking in and clocking out and collecting the paycheck. I think there's a very high need for, and already a movement towards, noticing things and trying to push the limits of what we're capable of, because we're so capable, right? So just to run through the motions is not good enough. It's needed, if not required, to think about how there can be growth, right? When we're challenged, that's when we're at our best. And to create a culture like that is a godsend in a company, right? And people are learning more and more how to do that with not only, like, you have to master yourself first, right? And then you can teach other people. But that self-mastery is definitely required. And I think more and more people are getting that in the leadership spaces, how to do that, and then how to lead other people to do that as well.
And, just off what you just said, Josh, no time like now are we seeing, so many opportunities or so many challenges of our capabilities than what we are seeing in this space and this dispensation. So this is a real opportunity for us as leaders to really not only look at pushing our own capabilities, but I think you said this when we spoke some time ago, but also tapping into the best of persons within our teams, even if they don't see it themselves.
Yes. Yeah. The topic of potential has grabbed my attention. Talk about consciousness. This is where I'm becoming more and more conscious about potential, because the more that we achieve, the more that we overcome, also the more that is possible, which is mind blowing. So it's just an exponential, like new heights and new things to see, new opportunities, the higher that we go. And I just think that's so powerful. It's a phenomenon that I think gets overlooked pretty easily, but it's also like once you get the hang of it, it's thrilling, it's addicting.
I agree. And the thing is, Josh, that potential is right there. That energy right there. You don't have
always there.
Side and look. So it's just harnessing that. It's already paid for, you can say. It's there, it's available, and we just need to tap into it and use that, right? So yeah, Josh, what was that?
I was just going to say, to figure out how to access it, right? It's there, just need to use the tools to be able to make it come alive. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we're going to get to those tools a little later. But, you work with individuals and you work with organizations as a coach and consultant. My next question will be in two parts. What is the number one mistake you're seeing being made within organizations and individuals today as it relates to expanding consciousness?
Yeah, so number one mistake. That's a great question. I think it's different for individuals versus teams. So let's start with teams first. Some companies do this, some don't, but to get people to set a culture of that conscious awareness and growth mentality, people have to feel like their work is meaningful and purposeful. So I would say a lot of companies don't grasp a very ideal vision of the future that everybody can get behind, from any employee, from C-level all the way down to administrator or part-time employee. Because I think when people are bought into that, and there's some great examples of some companies and corporations across the world that do that really well, because then obstacles are just obstacles. People overcome them. It's just expected part of the culture to be able to get on the other side of that. So I think the way to do that is to create that compelling vision that everybody can buy into. And I find people might think that they have that, but when we challenge them on it, it usually comes out different than what they originally had. And for individuals, maybe this is just a recency bias to answer this question, but that potential, it's the reminder of what's possible, what's capable. And I share that with my clients, from call number one, that this is a space to where we can talk about anything, and anything is possible. So they know that if they show up, they're going to get a correction, right? If they're lamenting something or if they're down on things, I'm here to elevate and get them to remember what's possible. No. And so what was part two of the question? You might have to remind me.
Oh, no, you did answer both, because it was teams and individuals, right? And you did answer those. And, in your response on the organizational or the team level, you mentioned that compelling vision. And I think that's one of the important elements of success, is to have a vision that everyone buys into, because I think that gives you that clarity that will, and I think with the clarity and balance together, expanding that consciousness will give a better flow, and when we are thinking clearly and more decisively, that's growth, right? So that vision is very, very important. One of the things that you mentioned to me, Josh, was that the average person thinks 65,000 thoughts per day, and yes, that about 95% of which was the thought of the previous day. Can you dive into that a little deeper and share some more with our listeners?
Yeah, so we can get really deep with that conversation, but let me say somewhat surface level here. So thoughts are measurable frequencies. We know how to calculate when somebody has a thought, right? So it's estimated that the average person has somewhere in the neighborhood of 65,000 thoughts every single day. Now you might think that's mind blowing. Well, first of all, it is, but second of all, that's including things, that we don't think that we think about. Like tying our shoes takes, there's a mental capacity that's exerted to be able to do that. Same with driving our car or brushing our teeth. And now these are things that we don't think about or don't have to be intentional about when we do them. So it's just interesting to think about what else is lumped into that. That's an unconscious thing, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not aware of most of the thoughts that we think. And I think that's really fascinating because that's kind of what we all have in common. It transcends culture and location, is that we all have this thing going on. It's just like snap, 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 thought. So like, we got to think about that. That's so important. And it just gets overlooked, and we just run through patterns. We're creatures of habit every single day. Now it serves us in some things, but it also very much doesn't serve us in other areas.
So how that relates to the whole matter of expanding our consciousness and conscious leadership? How can we harness that process? I mean, 65,000 thoughts, that's pretty impressive. I wouldn't even think that, that many, but, and it can be repetitive. How can we use, certain principles, I think, to harness the potential in that so that we can expand our awareness and consciousness that will lead us to success and growth? Yeah,
this is, I want to maybe give a different perspective of a practice that I'm sure many people have heard of before, is writing down gratitudes. Right. And so what we're doing when we do that, say we get to the end of our day and we make it a practice to think about what we were grateful for that day, you're being intentional about something that may have been subconscious earlier in that day. And if you hold a standard of a certain number, say 10 every evening, you might get to 4 or 5 pretty easily. Like, okay, that was good. I remember that. Yep. Grateful for that. That was good. Then you start thinking about, like, what else was there? And you become conscious of things that maybe you enjoyed, but were subconscious or unconscious about throughout the day. But just like a little, maybe a tiny life hack, that's something very easy, right? You can do that. It just takes some persistence to do that and to make it a habit. But I've gone months in a row where that was my practice. I'm not currently doing that because I do other, I'm experimenting with other practices and habits. But that was a very, I might call it a fruitful time of, like, first of all, I felt better. When you're in a state of gratitude, you just feel good. And second of all, I got to a point to where I was looking for it and trying to be conscious of it throughout the day, so I could have my list of 10 when I went to write it down. So just an immediate effect of a practice that made me more conscious and aware of the good things that were happening.
And that's impressive. Thanks for sharing that, Josh. And I would think too that having these repetitive thoughts, those repetitive thoughts are what kind of forms the foundation of how we respond to certain situations that may come up. So, and they build up over time. So, it creates that kind of pathway, or, narratives or belief systems, or, or responses, I think possibly will be linked to that.
Yeah, just to add to that, so you think of what a belief system is, it's just the same thought over and over and over again. That's what that is, right? So if you have a belief system, it feels right. It feels like you're not going to rock me off this thing. I know this to be true. And that's where the opportunity is, right? Because it's very different to see, or difficult to see that from a different perspective, but you realize where the source of that is coming from. It's just the same thought. And that we have the ability and the power to, first of all, become aware of that thought. And then second of all, to maybe mix in a new thought or a controversial thought or a conflicting thought about that topic.
Absolutely. So we disrupt those patterns and create new ones.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
What would you say to someone, Josh, who is fearful of expanding their consciousness and probably think that this conversation may be too woo, and can they both exist in the same place, expanding your consciousness and being fearful?
I think that's a lot of what expanding consciousness is. So you think about the patterns are there because they're comfortable. We get used to them. So this is maybe the number one thing that I've learned throughout trying to accelerate my growth in a exceedingly quick way, is that I've learned to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know that I'm bringing on discomfort on purpose, because I will inevitably come out the other side more fulfilled, more understanding, and it's just a better feeling. It's just a more wholesome, holistic way to live life, at least from my perspective. That's my opinion, but I've been through it. Doesn't make the fear any easier to deal with. It's like it shows up and it's like, no, this time's different. It feels different, but it's not. It's in the same category as all the other fear. We don't have that perspective yet to overcome it. And that's how you overcome it, is you lean into it and you study it and you think about it and you inevitably come up with another way. And that's gratifying to me.
Yeah. So the reward is greater than the risk. And, just listening to you speak, what comes to mind is that the whole matter of expanding your consciousness, it's okay to have that fear factor, and that will happen, but it's to, go around that, because this is really an inner game. That's where I think expanding that consciousness is not something external, it's something on the inside, and it reminds me of the picture of an iceberg where you're seeing the outside and, the peak, and that's the leader doing their thing, having great successes, leading the team to growth. But underneath is where the bulk of the work happens. The outer game is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, but the bulk of the work is down below the surface. So this is what I've boiled it down to, that, in terms of our consciousness, it's all about being fully present, being awake and aware of what is going on in our minds, our hearts, and having that ability to manage what's happening on external, any external disruptions with grace, with compassion, with capability. Isn't it always easier to say than do, Josh?
100%. Yes, for sure. Yeah. Well, I think my ability to coach is expanded whenever I go through something myself, because having been through it, it's such a different perspective. So you can talk about something all that you want, but unless you've been through it, then you don't have that perspective yet, right? But yeah, to your point, it's not easy. It's not easy to know that something's there, that it's going to be uncomfortable to face it, and doing it anyway. No one's going to scold you. There's no negative points for not doing it. And that's where we want to stay in there, and in the comfort zone. That scares the hell out of me. I don't want to do that, because I don't grow. It's not satisfying to me to just sit in that place.
So how might someone listening in achieve this expanded awareness? What would you say to them as the first step to take?
Yeah, so maybe I can answer. I got two different answers, but they're both good first steps, if you will. So I would just say practice it. It's like anything else that you want to become good at. You're not going to do it once and be good at it. And there's different ways. And you mentioned the word woo-woo. People have that perspective, but it's just in my nature to think about thinking. And I got into meditation a couple of years ago. And just let me dive a little bit deeper into that, and then we'll come out real quick. But the purpose of meditation, people say I can't meditate. I'm doing it wrong. The purpose is to let everything quiet so you can get to that space to where wisdom comes through and you can make sense. We go through life so quickly that our brain really can't catch up. We want to be able to analyze every situation. We just can't do it. So that's a lot of where overwhelm comes from, is those unexamined. So we don't know where we stand on things. So it's like, it gives us anxiety that like we're not going to know how to handle something. So meditation for me is like a pause, a timeout, like let everything, like when you first sit down, it's normal to have everything going on, but you can defeat that just with patience. And then you get to this place, that I would call a state to where you can concentrate and focus and think about what really matters. And I think that really matters. So anyway, some sort of practice, it doesn't have to be meditation, but something like that, to where, I get up early in the morning, I do yoga, right? Yoga would be a good thing too, because you're just focusing on breathing. You're focusing on how your body feels. So there's tons of things out there. Just find what it is for you. Maybe find a support system, a network, a accountability buddy, as I like to call them, somebody who's going to help hold you accountable.
Accountability.
And,
That's a new one. Thank you for sharing a new word with us.
Yes. And the second answer I would give, shameless little plug here, but I have access to an assessment that I call the Mindscan, that is meant to get you thinking about some of those unexamined things, some of those really important things that we don't get to think about, or we don't slow down enough every day to think about. And some really interesting information comes out of that once you engage with it. It's really cool.
Yes, and to your listeners, stay tuned to the end where you'll get more information of how you will be able to access this assessment, which Josh is giving to our listeners free of charge. So listen out to hear more about that. I did the scan a few days ago, and it was the most interesting scan I've done in a while. Most intriguing in terms of how it's done, the questions asked, and how accurate it was, and quite revealing in terms of looking at you, the individual, from an internal and an external perspective. Pretty impressive in terms of, from 2 questions, they were able to make such an accurate assessment. So, please take up Josh on his offer, and you'll get more details at the end. So in terms of other tools that, what are some other tools that organizations can use, Josh, to help them to expand this conscious leadership culture within their organization?
It's a great question. I'll give you the business answer is to do a gap analysis. Think about your strengths and weaknesses, be really honest about the things you do well and the things that maybe you don't do as well. And then, of course, the SWOT, and the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. It's cliche, but it's a reason it's cliche. It's because it works. That these are things that once you might think that you know a weakness or a threat, but then when you start to list them and maybe even describe them or talk more deeply about them, you learn more about them, and more ideas can come about how to address those things. So I always, this is like, I'm giving 2 answers for every question. I hope that's okay for whatever reason.
Fine. Bring it
but
on.
to develop a culture around asking people what they want or why they're here, like a bigger draw to the purpose of why people are doing what they're doing. Because what you'll do, it's both good and bad, but they're both good in a sense that, you might lose somebody that way. Like, oh, this is not what I want. But that's good, right? You don't want that in a company, somebody who's not willing to be there. But then you get even more commitment from the people who are like, well, this is what it is. I'm clear on that. And they're more committed that way. And you get more things done. And it also promotes that culture of being aware and thinking about these things.
Awesome. And, on the whole matter of consciousness, one of the quotes that my favorite quote, I really love quotes, it's from the book Flow, the psychology of optimal experience. And it's the name of the author. I will put it in the resources. I do not want to spoil his name. Right? But he said that the control of consciousness determines the quality of life. Right? So that's something I think is very profound. And it's interesting that that's a quote from a book called Flow, right? The psychology of optimal experiences. And I think that by, building that consciousness, and based on what you have shared, Josh, that really organizations and teams can expand their and have optimal experiences in business and in their relationships, which is something that I think any organization would want. So we're getting pretty close to wrapping up, Josh. Is there any question that I should have asked that I didn't?
Not that I can think of. I might want to share a little bit more about the Mindscan if I could.
Sure. Let's hear it.
Or scan. There's some things that come up about that. I think the beauty of the Mindscan is in its simplicity. Like you said, there's just 2 questions. You're just ranking things in a specific order based on how you perceive the world. And it takes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So there's really no obligation. Now, that sounds like it's easy, it's simple, but there's a lot of science and math behind it. And why I think it's so cool is that the person who created it, his name is Dr. Robert Hartman. He was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in his work for formal axiology. And all that is the study of what's valuable to us or what is quote unquote good. And it's different for everybody. I have some people who take the assessment and say, hey, I got them all right. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. It's going to be different for everybody. But so it's very complex in the way that there's mathematics involved and, to statements, which I think is super cool. And on the opposite of that, it's just a 2x3 matrix that results from an internal and external world. And there's simplicity in the results. And it's just clear on not only what's happening, but also what you can do to address it or to think about why things are the way that they are.
Thank you for sharing that, Josh. And I can attest to what he has said in terms of the simplicity, yet the science behind it and the accuracy of the results. So please check it out. Josh, we have come to the end of our interview. And there's one last question that I have to ask. I ask all my guests. And, I believe that there is power in questions that you ask. So the question is for you, the final question for you, your career, what is one question that you frequently use when you're working with teams to get the best outcomes?
What is one question I frequently use with teams to get the best outcomes? That is a great question. Here's the question. Is this really what you want? I think so much of life is played on the surface. And hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Just that exchange. Thinking more deeply, this is a good connection to the name of your podcast and the episode, right? Consciousness is about thinking about those things and not having those surface answers be okay. So maybe asking that question a couple different times. What do you want? You'll get an answer. Okay, but what do you really want? And it's so revealing when people are given the freedom to really express what they want.
Yeah. I think that's a deep question. What do you want? It can be thought of as rude, if you say, what do you want? Depending on how you say it. But what do you really want? It's a deeper answer that you're digging a little bit more. That's a great question, Josh. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tamar.
So this was indeed a fabulous discussion. It is evident that conscious leadership leads to conscious businesses, and it is a must to have sustainable success. Josh, it was great having you. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Tamar. Appreciate it.
As usual, to you, our guests, we want to thank you, our listeners, for your time and your support. Hope you enjoyed and got massive value from this episode. We encourage you to take the Mindscan assessment. It is a $500 value, and Josh is offering it to you, our listeners, for free with a free review. You can reach him at joshua@proadvisorcoach.com. You can reach out to me at tamar@tamarnelson.com or on LinkedIn at tamar-nelson if you would like to be a guest or to share any feedback or suggestions you may have. I'd love to hear from you. Please also share and subscribe if you found this valuable. Give us a thumbs up and leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. Please join us again for another information-packed episode. Until next time, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.